Me welcome all of you to our CMA Sri Lanka CPD webinar, Overcoming Debt Crisis, Point of View. I think I'd like to briefly welcome our panel of speakers who are present here. We have Mr. Dubinda Hulangamu, who is the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, and of course, he's a Senior Partner and Head of Tax of Ernst & Young. His point of view will be on the role of business as the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Then thereafter, we have the role of politicians. So I'm very thankful to Honorable Iran Vikamaratna, Member of Parliament, for accepting his invitation. But I'm sure he is in good company because he is someone from the private sector. So we are very happy that you are here and we are very welcome. And we also feel that you will take the views of the private sector to the parliament. I think that's a very good sign that we have. Then the other important one, of course, will be the tourism, a quick fix to earn foreign exchange. We have a new chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Board, Mr. Priyantha Fernando. So let me welcome him, and I'm very happy that he's here with us. I'm sure might be one of his first public appearances that he's having after he assumed. I don't know, I'm sure he would have appeared much more, but this is going to be a very important one. Then another important sector is the ICT and BPO, the growth sector to double exports. And of course, we need to build a knowledge economy. That will be Ashik Ali, who's the chairman of SLASCOM. And he too is just taken over the chairmanship of SLASCOM. So we are very fortunate that he's here and that he'll be able to give his point of view. And of course, we have one panelist, Mr. Manil Jasingh. He will come in a little late. That's the most important one of the audit point of view. So I'll just like to make a brief comment on a few matters. First of all, just to introduce the Institute of Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka. We are the National Professional Management Accounting Body in Sri Lanka. And we have a very important role today, especially one area is the costing and pricing. Today's price is not there maybe within hours or maybe the next day. But the most important thing that our profession has seen is that a lot of them are not even maintaining books of records or proper books of records, maintaining their costs, their labor costs, and other direct costs. So this is really a very unfortunate event because without that, I don't know how they are determining the prices. Today it is one price, tomorrow it is another price, maybe the import price. How it is going, we are not there. So transparency is very essential, and that's why we, the Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, because we did not have a management accounting body in Sri Lanka, but the government felt the need for a cost and management accounting body. Of course, we call ourselves management accounting, but costing is a very important element in this. And today, with the crisis situation, it has become very important. So today, I'm sure that I thought that I should bring this to the notice, and we are taking all measures. We've set up what is called the Cost and Management Accounting Standards Board, and they will be setting standards for the different industries, telling people how to cost a product, because today we have the bus fares going up, we are having the bread prices going up, everything is going up, but I don't know whether even the income tax people know whether they are having proper books or records. A lot of them are giving money, the banks are giving money, but they don't ask them to maintain books of records. How they are giving the money, the reason for non-performing loans increasing are some other reasons. So I think some sort of compulsion, mandatory requirement is necessary in order to bring some discipline in. Then the other important thing, of course, is the overcoming the debt crisis. The main reason is that our expenditure is more than the income. So that's means that we need to control our expenditure. Again, it comes to the cost control, the lean accounting, all these aspects that have to go in. So that's again another reason why the management accounting profession has to come in and play a major role. So we think that there is some importance, and we are conducting these webinars to show the importance of costing. But without costing, we will be nowhere, because how much direct cost is, how much of overheads are there. Because you will find that your cost of production is very low, but when you add all your other overheads, your cost of production is going high. Because some of the important things is, if you know the cost, then you can determine the efficiency, you can determine the productivity, you can find out the wastage. If there is corruption, you can find out. So all these are embedded in this word of costing. So I think from the private sector, I know that if they do not maintain their cost properly, if they are not competitive, they have to go out to the market. But public sector, that is not there. The finance ministry will give them a letter of guarantee to the state bank, and they can get a loan. So, but the private sector is quite different. But we are really very worried, because private sector is using the best management practices. They are doing whatever possible. They are trying to expand the exports. They are cutting down costs. You see, during the COVID-19 pandemic, most of them cut down their costs. But then we should see that today, the biggest problem is the government has not enough income to pay the salaries of the government servants. So how are they going to meet this? So that's another reason why the debt crisis has happened. Then the other thing, of course, is that once you take a loan, you should know how to repay the loan. So all these things are really connected. And as people in the financial field, myself being both a chartered accountant and management accountant, I am really ashamed, as to what has happened to this country, because we say that we have the best accountants in this country, but the public sector may not have a single accountant. And even when the CMA, the cabinet decided in 2014 for the government to recruit our management accountants, it took them 7 years to give this approval. So you can see how the government is working, and they don't really see the value that an accountant can play. I want to suggest that the finance ministry should have a separate costing department. If they have a costing department, they can then check up and calculate and see what is the cost of electricity in this country. What is the cost of petroleum in this country, but they do not have that expertise. Without expertise, you can't do. So that's why knowledge economy is essential, not only in the IT industry, but also in the other areas, especially in the accounting area. Because I can tell you that today, if you take the CEB, nature is helping us a lot. The cost of production of electricity by hydro is only 2 rupees and maybe 95 cents. But then when you go to thermal, it is very much higher, maybe 29, 30 rupees. So we have to preserve the nature. We have to ensure that the water is preserved, so that we'll be able to not go to save, to spend the foreign exchange. So these are just a few of the things that I thought, because I'm sure those who are in the, who are going to give their points of view will take this into account. Because what we want to see is how we can improve our income and reduce our expenditure. Our local bankers know what it is. If you are in default, you know how they treat you. You will never be able to go close to them. You will not get a single cent. But we are also in that same situation. So we need to see how we can fight this, how we can all contribute towards this and make Sri Lanka back to what it was earlier. So with those opening remarks, I think Ruchira is back again. Ruchira, I hand you back to Ruchira.
Thank you very much, Professor, for your opening remarks. Apologies for the technical blip which has happened at the beginning. So now I would like to move into our speakers. To start with Mr. Duminto Hulangamua, Senior Partner Head of Tax of Ernst & Young. Also, he is the Vice Chairman of Sri Lanka Chamber of Exports. Ms. Duminto Hulangamua, we would like to hear from you the role of business, especially business professionals, in order to overcome the debt crisis that the country is going through at the moment. Over to you.
Thank you, Ruchira, and thank you, Professor. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation you have extended to me to speak to your members and the rest of the audience on the subject of debt restructuring and the role the business community can play. Now, I'm sorry I don't have a slide presentation. I told Professor that it is easier to discuss this matter without a slide, and it's more communicative. So, before I get to the role the business community, what it can do, the role it should play in this sphere, first, for the benefit of the audience, I want to put the debt position and why it has come to that position in order to get a perspective of the subject matter. Now, when you say the government debt, now earlier when you talk of government debt, it was already discussed in the Monetary Board of Central Bank, probably the boardrooms of the corporate sector, but now this matter has been a matter of discussion down to the very level of society. Three-wheel drivers, shops, bakeries, Kade Mudalalis, all talk of debt restructuring. So what does our Sri Lanka debt means? We have two components of the debt, the external component and the local debt. The external component of debt is largely the bilateral debt, which we have borrowed from countries like India, Japan, and China. The multilateral debt, which is from the ADB, the World Bank, IMF, the likes, and the private debt, which largely consists of sovereign bonds and Sri Lanka development bonds. The sovereign bonds investors are largely both local banks as well as non-resident persons have invested in sovereign bonds. So total of all these amounts to what is called external debt. In addition to that, we have the local debt, which is the treasury bills and the treasury bonds. They're largely raised, which is called the local debt raised by the central bank on behalf of the treasury. And then we have other SOE borrowings like the CPC, the CEB largely, and other SOEs that are borrowed from the local banks. Then there are government guarantees like the government has given guarantee to Sri Lankan Airlines. All that consists of what is called the total government debt. Now, based on reports published by central bank, the total government debt is around close to $100 billion, of which $51 billion is the foreign debt and about $49 billion is the local debt. Now, you know, why are we talking of restructuring? Because the government has announced that they will not be in a position to pay the external debt. So by making the announcement that they are unable to pay the external debt, we have gone to what is called a default position. As a result of which, we are not honoring any other debt payments payable to the external debtors with interest and capital. The local debt is being serviced, the interest is paid, and the capital is being paid. So it is a foreign debt that has gone into arrears. And the whole restructuring discussion up to about last month was revolving around this foreign debt component. And for that purpose, the government has appointed a financial consultant and a legal consultant to discuss with creditors and come up with a sustainable debt repayment structure. Now, why is the debt gone into arrears? I think all of you know. We have two reasons why it has gone to arrears. Firstly, is we don't have enough income. There is an income minus expenses is inadequate to pay the foreign debt. Two, we don't have the cash flows. As accountants, you know, the P&L balance sheet and the cash flow are two different statements. On the one side, we don't have the income to sustain our expenses. And on the other hand, we don't have foreign currency to service our foreign debt. The local debt, of course, can be serviced by borrowing more in the market. Now, once we have announced, people might ask a question, why can't we borrow in the like in the past in the market, why can't you borrow? Unfortunately, since we announced a default, no person internationally will be able to lend any money to Sri Lanka, including the countries that have already entered into the agreement with Sri Lanka. So, for example, Japan as a country, as you know, has suspended all projects in Sri Lanka because the debt is in arrears. Now, what is the reason for this? Now, if you look at the Sri Lanka's revenue, now this year, the estimated revenue at the best in Sri Lanka this year will be 1.5 trillion rupees, 1.5 trillion rupees. And our expenditure at best would be something close to 3.5 trillion, minimum of 3.5 trillion rupees. So you can see there's a gap of 2 trillion rupees which we have to finance. Now, how do you finance 2 trillion rupee gap when you don't have income So basically, there are ways in which you have to finance this 2 trillion in order to pay our debt. So once, if we are unable to pay the 2 trillion in terms of our expenses, that means we are not sustainable. Our debt is not sustainable. Because of the 3.5 trillion rupee of expenses, the interest component, both local and foreign debt component, is close to 1 trillion rupees. Of the balance 1.5 trillion rupees, 50% goes to government sector salaries, and other 50% goes for SOE transfers to sustainable SOEs, pension payments, and subsidies and other considering like Samurdhi and fertilizer subsidies, etc. Takes another 1/3. So basically, of our expense, 1/3 goes for interest, 1/3 goes for salaries, and 1/3 goes for concessions. So how do you then make the debt sustainable? Now, according to the IMF, they are saying for Sri Lanka to receive any IMF assistance, the debt must be sustainable. Now, for debt to be sustainable, according to their estimates, Sri Lanka must be able to have at least a 1% surplus on its primary account of GDP by 2025, which means we must hit at the current levels of expenditure. If you're going to maintain the same 3.5 trillion, we need to get 4 trillion of revenue by 2025. Now, that is an increase of more than 100%. Now, is it possible? In my view, it's not possible for us to increase our revenue twofold. So then how do you sustain this deficit? One is to increase revenue. Now, increasing revenue means rates can go up. The income tax rate, VAT rates can go up to a sustainable point. You can't raise income tax beyond 30%, 35%, then the law of diminishing returns does not give any return on that investment. Similarly, VAT can't be taken beyond a certain threshold because then consumption goes down. So then the desired revenue won't come. So the only way you can increase revenue is reasonable increase in rates and increase the base. When I say increase the base, I'm not necessarily referring to getting people who don't pay tax into the net. That is a part of it, but I know how big it is. But basically, I'm saying we'll have to remove all the exemptions that we currently have. All VAT exemptions, other than absolute essential expenses, services like maybe health and education, all the other exemptions may have to be removed in order to enhance and increase that base to make a substantial revenue collection. And then through economic growth. At the moment, we are on an economic stabilization program. We have cut capital expenditure. Economic growth forecast won't be that good, that great in my next 2 or 3 years. So those are the 3 areas in which we can increase revenue. Then other thing is what, as Professor said, is reduce the government expenditure. Now, government expense reduction, as you know, can't, in terms of public servant salaries, can't happen overnight. There has to be a restructuring program the government has to do, what we call SOE reform process, and other government departments have to be reformed in order to cut the expenditure of public servants. So that can't happen overnight, so it might take some time. Then they can look at grants and subsidies. That again, we have a vulnerable society in our country, so we can't remove the grants and concessions overnight. We'll have to cut a vulnerable society. I'll tell you why that is later on. And then, so there is very little option in my view in cutting grants and subsidies because we have vulnerable society to look after, and we need to direct those grant subsidies in order to make sure that the societies are looked after, because we can't have a social revolution. So therefore, we need to make sure that those sectors are looked after. The other only option that is available to the government is the interest rate. Now, as I told you, there's about $1 trillion of interest the government pays. Now, of that, 500 trillion is for the foreign debt. Another 500 trillion is for the 500 billion is for the local debt. So of that $500 billion foreign debt, the government has already announced a moratorium. So they're not going to pay that $500,000 unless and until such time a restructuring program is being achieved. So because of that, there might be some temporary concession or period of which the government might be able to get away with at least a part of its expenditure by freezing the interest on the foreign debt. Of course, that is a short-term measure, but that is the only significant cut in expenditure they can achieve overnight, which they've already done. The other way to bridge this deficit of $2 billion, last available method is to sale of our assets. That is, identify the state-owned enterprises that need to be privatized, peopleized, whatever name you call it. Identify the enterprises that are loss-making, that need to be restructured, the CB and the CPC, and then also Lankan Airlines, whatever they may be, and then sell the asset in order to realize that gain, so that will sustain your deficit to next. Of course, remember, it's a one-off thing. Every year we can't be selling our assets, so there's only one-off thing in order to overcome our current deficit. But going forward, the government must decide as to how they are going to bridge the deficit by reduction of expenditure and increasing revenue. So the question is, most people are asking, is that we didn't manage the economy. It was the politician who managed the economy. It was the government office who managed the economy. It is red, blue, and green that manage the economy. So there is no justification. It's not reasonable to anyone to hold the general public responsible for this catastrophic situation we are in, and therefore we are responsible, and it has to be paid for in some other way without putting any burden on the people. Well, to an extent, there may have been mismanagement, there may have been corruption, but what percentage of the total debt is that, I really don't know. But as the governor of central bank has put it nicely last week, there may have been corruption of 10% of that debt. But the balance 90% has gone for consumption. All of us, the rich, the poor, the middle class, low middle class, all of us have benefited from that reduced or rather the concessions that were available. Because why do you take these loans? The loans were taken to bridge budget deficits. They are gone for infrastructure development, like building roads, bridges, and schools, where we have benefited. And they are gone for consumption. Electricity was given at absurdly low rates. Fuel was sold at absurdly low rates. Education is free. Health is free. Roads are free. The toll on roads are subsidized. So all of us have consumed and benefited from this concession, from this low subsidized regime. The rich, the poor have equally benefited. And that is the reason why this situation has arisen, because we didn't pay the price for what is really worth. The dollar was pegged at 200. Successive governments refused to bring the dollar to the market rate. We all benefited from the low dollar rate. We imported as much as possible. We borrowed to substitute or rather pay off for the loans in respect of the borrowings. And we ate into all our reserves. We consumed all our reserves when the dollar was pegged at 200 rupees and at low interest rates. And the interest rates were artificially low in the last few years, as a result of which people consumed, they borrowed, and we finished all the money that we had. So I don't think it's one person or the politician that are responsible. The people at large, unknowingly even, have been responsible for this downfall. So as a business community, coming to the topic, how do we react to the situation? We can see what's happening now. In the morning, we had a 2-hour meeting with the president, with the business community of our members of our chamber, where we told him that the efforts taken by the government to curtail the economy, contract the economy, and to stop the slide and the demand of the dollar are appreciated. That is, to keep the interest rates high, reduce consumption, and to float the dollar so that people pay the price, or actual cost of the price, or the goods or services, they pay the correct price. But then on the other hand, as a business community, where we face was the import restrictions. For example, you saw the import restriction that imposed yesterday. It is essential. So when we went to the business community and explained to the president and told our problems of the large number of employees who are dependent on the industries, some of these basic items required the tourism industry. We are going to the winter season, Christmas season. Tourists are coming to the country now. So we need these goods to come to the country to keep industry moving, to produce goods for the tourism market for the December season. The answer that came from them is that we understand and appreciate all these issues. But the question is, do you want, with the few dollars we have, do you want the gas, electricity, and fuel, or you want to enjoy Christmas? So those are the choices we have. So as a business community, yes, we are affected. We are affected because our businesses are getting affected. We can't run the normal businesses. Import, we have a massive 30 to 40% of our economy is import-driven economy. So we have a large number of employees, companies that are dependent on the import economy. And the entire import economy shrunk today because of the current situation. But there's no choice in my view. We cannot complain. We can complain, but there is only one path in my view. And we have to go through this path, however difficult it is, however rigorous it is. We will have to go through this path until such time our reserves are comfortably built to a level where government can relax import controls, relax people.
Govinda, we can't hear you.
Professor, I thought I lost my connection.
Well, Professor, I think we had a power cut.
Okay.
Okay. It should come then. Let's see.
So, Professor, shall we proceed?
Just wait 2 minutes. If it's a power cut, he should come in.
No, it's back so that the line gets cut off and then.
Yeah. We'll wait a minute, Pujari coming.
Okay, Professor. Sure.
Rejoining, yeah. Right.
Can you hear me, Dr. Professor?
Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
okay,
yes.
fine.
I'm so sorry. These are all
Yeah,
restructuring issues we are facing. I thought hospital care does not have power cuts, so there was a power cut and it takes time for the router to get back. Sorry about it, ladies and gentlemen who are listening. I'm so sorry about it. It's beyond me. Yeah, so getting back to this question. So what do we do as business on the restructuring? See, what will happen as a result of restructuring, no one knows. In fact, this morning when we meet the president, we asked question, how good the IMA discussions are going on. Will there be, the first question, the bankers were there, all the big banks are present, and they were asking whether there is impact domestic debt. So no one can ask that question at the moment. The discussions are going on. So as I told you, we have two components, the external debt and the domestic debt. Now the external debt, if there is a haircut or there is a rescheduling of the external debt, a freezing of the interest, will not have a negative impact, in my view, from a cash flow and an income point of view for the business community. Of course, it has a longer term impacts in terms of our ability to borrow overseas, cost of borrowing overseas. All that will get impacted when there's a default on the debt. It all depends how soon we overcome the crisis by recording economic growth, which can show that it is sustainable. So until such time, there will be difficulty for Sri Lankan banks and Sri Lankans to borrow overseas once we are in default mode. But once the IMF says that our debt is sustainable, that our income levels are adequate to sustain the debt, then I think we can safely go to foreign markets to borrow in the event we need to borrow. Now, the issue is on domestic debt. On the domestic debt, there is a huge debate as to the domestic debt will be touched in the restructuring process. Which the Governor Central Bank has said that domestic won't be restructured, it won't be touched. But I don't know. I don't want to raise unnecessary speculation, fear amongst people, or even to give overconfidence to them. But when I look at the numbers and statistics, I cannot see how our total debt repayment can become sustainable unless the local debt is also included. For example, our interest expense alone is 1 trillion, as I told you, of which 500 trillion is for local, 500 billion local debt, 500 billion foreign debt. So I'm only hoping and praying that they don't touch the local debt in order to meet that gap and that deficit of achieving 1% surplus on the primary account. So how will this process of structuring? So if you go for debt restructuring, then we have to show, if you are not going to especially touch the local debt, if you want to keep the local debt as is intact, then we have to make sure we are compensating revenue and adequate economic growth to sustain the local debt. And how do we do that? Number one, as I told you, is we will have to learn to pay for the price of goods and services, the correct commercial price, a market-driven price, which means we will see an increase in our costs as businesses. As it is, electricity has gone up in price substantially, water will go up in price, other goods and services will go up in price, what we purchase, and then tariffs will go up in price. More than anything else, there will be a sharp increase in taxes, both income tax and VAT. Income taxes, I believe the personal tax is 18% to 32%, the corporate rate might go to 30%. The discussion I have participated in IMF, they're talking of a uniform tax rate. They are saying there need not be a concession rate for exporters. They also can go to the normal rate. Why give a special rate for software? Why give a special rate for export of services? So they're all saying, so the discussions are in order to make this debt sustainable, there has been substantial increase.
We can't hear you, Duminder, although you're speaking.
Professor, sorry, again it went off.
Mm.
So I think Dumindo is still logging in.
Right. I think he's come to the closing stages, Suchira, so maybe we'll go to the next speaker. Yeah.
Okay, Professor. So, ladies and gentlemen, again, on behalf of CMA Sri Lanka, I beg your pardon for the technical difficulties that we are going through currently with some of our speakers. So now I would like to extend my gratitude to Mr. Dumindu Hulangamua, the Vice Chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and also Senior Partner and Head of Tax at Ernst & Young, for explaining the problem that we have dug ourselves and the role that we have, the role that we as finance professionals can play in order to help the government to ease the burden. So now I would like to move to our second speaker, Honorable Mr. Eran Vikramaratne, a parliamentarian, a member of the opposition, to talk about the role of politicians in order to overcome the debt restructuring problem. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for inviting me. I don't know whether my comments are going to be the role of the politician. However, I make a few comments, and maybe in the discussion, maybe we can respond. I think Mr. Hulangamua has clearly set out the profile of our debt, right? He gave the numbers as well, right? In dollars, you know, it was 51 billion, local and foreign was about 49. And if you took that 4 months ago, because now it is like 48%, 47, 48% foreign and 53% local. If you took that 4 months ago, it was only 37%. You see, so it has, you know, kind of drastically changed. Then if you look at the composition of it, also he said the important things, and I will just make a few comments. One is on the foreign debt, you have the multilaterals, and then you have the bilaterals, then you have the market debt. So if you look at the financial markets, it's about half of the multilateral and the bilateral. They are together about 3, and the other one is about 3.5. So that's sorry, I will not say numbers because these are in rupees. I've converted into rupees, but it's about half and half. And we'll stick with Duminder's numbers in the dollars, so that might make it a little bit more easier to understand. So one of the issues that is there is that we have to be clear on what our position is going to be on the debt restructuring. I was glad to see the president's comment the other day saying that the Chinese also need to sing from the same sheet like everybody else. So you have the multilaterals, bilaterals, and then you come in to the Paris Club countries, and then you have India and China. And certainly all of them will be sensitive to the issue of being treated equally, because they don't want you to take, you know, your money from one party and then pay it to the other party. And we're talking there about more equal partners, and I think that principle should apply, and therefore we are in complete agreement with the president's statement, right, that everybody should come around, you know, or India, China, and the Paris Club should come around to the same basis. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for those countries to help a little small island state. They say this is an opportunity, and they should all come together on that, because our foreign policy is clear. Our foreign policy is friendship with all, and we just can't become you know, sandwiched in a geopolitical game. So that is our foreign policy stance. The foreign policy stance of the government and the opposition won't be different. It is, in the old language, it was a non-aligned foreign policy, but now we don't use that language. So we say it's a friendship with all foreign policy, and clearly taking into consideration our geographical positioning just very close to India, and therefore not doing things that will in any way cast some doubt on India's defense issues. And that is the realistic foreign policy, and I think it's shared by the government and the opposition. On Mr. Hulangumu, Duminda also referred to the present discussions that are going on. And I think that one thing that we want to be clear is that International Monetary Fund and others, right, who are looking at its sustainability, we are also looking at its sustainability, not just them, right? But we need to have realistic targets. Primary balance is necessary, and Sri Lanka has had a primary balance only in 1954, 1955, and once in the 70s, and after that only in 2017 and 2018. So 5 years out of basically 73 years only, and 2 years were during the last regime of the 5. So we certainly need to go for a primary surplus, there's no question. But I think given the very dire situation that we face now, I think we have to tell the International Monetary Fund at the highest levels. We are now talking with officials in terms of the negotiations at a staff level agreement, that we need to be, we need the primary balance, but we have to push back, you see, on when this could be achieved. We can't just look at ratios which they will put forward. They want to see the 140 go to 100% of GDP in a short period of time. And then they have other ratios to get it down to 80 and so forth. And then we need to be realistic. We can't solve one problem by creating another problem. That's going to be extremely foolish to do. And therefore, here we are, I'm now speaking as a member of the opposition here, but we are going to be, basically not going to be, we are talking with the government, right? Because even though we are in opposition to the government on some political issues, certainly on the economic issues, we are finding common ground. We want to support the government in basically coming out of the economic crisis that we are presently facing. We want to. And therefore, we would like to say that on domestic debt restructuring, please don't go there, because anyway, domestic debt holders have already, with inflation, lost a lot of their value anyway. We don't want to take measures that will put the banking system in jeopardy. And we need to go about it sensibly. We need to go about that. So there are other ways of handling it, right? Other ways of handling it. So we have institutions, and Duminda referred to it, CEB, CPC, Sri Lankan Airlines, so forth and so on. We don't want to be just, one way in the restructuring that, people, technical people come up with is, we need to restructure those places. So therefore we will pass on that debt also to the government, right? And already they are saying that the percentages are higher, and if you pass those debt into the government, the percentages will go even worse. And that's building up the case for domestic debt restructuring. We say no to that. We say, right, we look at the institutions separately. If some institutions have to go to the wall, they have to go to the wall, right? We can't take it all off the savers and depositors in this country, right? So we have to basically agree on the principle. That is why we are opposed to domestic debt restructuring. So the other positive that can come out of that is some of those institutions, then we'll have to look for capital, government institutions. And that's a good thing, because, right, if it goes in to get capital, we will also have private sector participation in government institutions. And that will be welcome also from the point of view of management, right? That will be very welcome. Lakshman Vatavala mentioned in his opening remarks that, government organizations don't even sometimes have a qualified accountant. What he said was actually correct. We'll be shocked and surprised at it, but lots of them don't have, you see. So without having the personnel in place, trying to put things right is not easy. It begs larger questions. The larger questions are qualified people like you, who are in this webinar, right, are unwilling to go and work in government for various reasons. One is politicization, lack of proper processes, procedures, and so forth, and also lack of remuneration. You see, so there's a more fundamental issues to be answered there, and that is why they lack it. So one way of handling it is actually private sector participation directly in management. You see, that's one way of handling it. That's not the only way. Public sector reform needs to happen, but one way of particularly state-owned enterprises and all, we have to be open and we have to make sure that there's private sector participation. I think this is the opportunity to do so, because this discussion sometimes was not possible in the past because the discussion gets politicized. It has ruined this country. And therefore, I think government and opposition, we need to be speaking in one voice on some of these issues, and we need to move in that direction also. So I said on the domestic debt, that is something we will not agree on, domestic debt restructuring. There are lots of other possibilities that need to be explored. The International Monetary Fund needs to know that as well. And just putting on targets which are just making it difficult for government to deliver doesn't really help, right? And the government and the opposition are on this together. And therefore, we are saying, and there are lots of other details, and I won't go into talking about those details on debt restructuring. Another thing I might say, because there was some reference to the budget deficit and bringing the primary deficit on revenues, I completely agree with the things that were shared. I think this whole issue about wealth being taxed. Now, we didn't call it wealth tax. When we brought in the new Inland Revenue Act, one of the main principles there by Mangala Samaraveera was to move away from political discretion to what is in black and white. And I think it was a major step forward, that act. But we didn't use the word wealth tax, but we taxed capital gains. We exempted the securities, basically trading, but we established that principle also. So I would say we will need to include that principle also, in addition to everything that had been said. On the restructuring of SOEs, I won't say anything more. I would also say that the point that was made that the base needs to be increased, it needs to be increased, irrespective of revenue. In 1 year, after the new Inland Revenue Act came in, revenues went up by 44% in 1 year. And taxpayers went up from 986,000 to more than 1.5 million taxpayers. So the revenue numbers may not be very big, but I think there is also a justice issue, right? And that everybody should be paying taxes. And we have a lot to do in the public sector there as well. On cost, I would say that we have to be radical. Again, conversations that we couldn't have previously, right? Public sector reform must happen, right? This country is a small country. Our defense is primarily our foreign policy, our external defense is. And we don't need to invest in anything else. It's really our foreign policy is our primary defense. We need to be realistic. We're a small island state, right? Competing in a gigantic world out there. And then on expenditure cuts, right? Defense expenditure will have to be looked at. This is a country with a large armed forces, huge defense expenditures, bigger than our education and health. Capital expenditures will have to be looked at. I would also make this additional point post-war. One of the biggest policy mistakes we made post-war was that we invested in non-tradables. We invested in basically in a lot of hard infrastructure rather than in soft infrastructure. We are a country with very limited resources. We have some hard choices to make. It needs to be very clear that any future government, right, we will have to invest really in soft infrastructure, in human resources, in people, in education, in training. We need to invest in a quality training. Quality, I would say numbers is not the issue, really quality is an issue. Won't go into the details there. And every child has to have a high education. It may be university, it may be vocational training, whatever. So this is part of the reform structure that we are actually talking about. I will probably conclude there. I'm sure when we have the discussion, maybe if other questions come, we can certainly entertain them. But one closing remark that I must make, and I like what Duminder said, is that everybody is responsible. You know, often this thing is created that is 225 people are responsible for everything. No, I think everybody is responsible, and professionals are more responsible than others, you see. And when we did the tax changes, we had three belts only. We had a 14% concessionary belt for exporters, information technology, etc. And that is now under question by the International Monetary Fund, is what we just heard. We had 28%, which was a next belt, and that is the normal corporate tax. And then we had 40% for alcohol, tobacco, you know, and gaming and things like that. Those are the three belts that we actually had. We need to rethink a little bit on the export side, because we have a dollar crisis. The IMF may be suggesting that, but we seriously need to look at that, because we have a dollar crisis. What are the other incentives? And the private sector participation, exports has to be number one. Private sector participation has to be number one. And therefore, we will have to look at all the barriers that are there for the private sector to come and participate. Whole lot of barriers, competitiveness index, you know, all those things. I'm not going to repeat it, right? All those barriers need to be re-looked at. So in terms of the responsibility, I would say that when the taxes were increased, I had to say this reluctantly, but I had to say it, right? We didn't get the support, right, of the corporate sector, right? Because we were in an IMF program. We were going for fiscal consolidation. Revenues were up, taxpayer numbers were up, primary balances were being built up, and we were trying to go further down that road. And then you have politicians who go around the country saying, you know, we'll just reduce all the taxes. And we saw the disaster that was created. So I think we need to be more enlightened, because even as professionals, we have a huge responsibility as the country goes forward, that we make decisions essentially that are best for the country. Sometimes even our political parties don't agree with us, and we have lots of internal battles within it. But I think professionals, whether we are in politics or whether we are outside it, we should move from that. Thank you again for inviting me to participate.
Thank you, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, that was Mr. Eran Wickramaratne, Honorable MP, currently in the opposition, but as he has mentioned, we expect the opposition will work on economic reforms with the government in order to help the government to overcome the economic and political problems that it is currently going through. And also, I believe that through an all-party government, as suggested by the President and also required by IMF, we will be able to overcome much of the problems that we are facing when it comes to debt restructuring. Thank you very much once again for your comments, sir. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I can see some of, there are two questions in the Q&A session. Before I invite Mr. Priyantha Fernando to begin his speech, I would also want to remind you that when you put the questions, when you want to ask a question from one of our speakers or from a panelist in the Q&A session, please put your questions in the Q&A session so that some of the questions they would be able to answer then and there. And also I'll pick the questions from the Q&A. Now I would like to move to our third speaker, Mr. Priyantha Fernando. The chairman of the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion, the Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Board, Mr. Priyantha Fernando, I met recently at the OPA conference. He has done a wonderful presentation a week back at the OPA conference. Today he's going to talk to us on the impact of tourism, or how tourism can help to earn quick foreign exchange to Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Priyantha.
Thank you, Ruchira. And thank you, Professor, for inviting me to make this presentation today. Just one correction, it's the Sri Lanka Tourism Development Authority that I am heading. And Sri Lanka Tourism Promotion Bureau is also another institution falling under Sri Lanka Tourism. Okay.
Sorry about that, Mr. Priyantha.
Can we activate the presentation, Ruchira, on the screen?
You have to share the screen, Mr. Priyantha. Through share screen, you can activate the presentation. You can share your screen.
It hasn't been enabled from that end, I understand.
Host has to enable you.
The host has to enable us.
Tarithu, can you please have a look into it?
Yes, now try.
Now it's okay.
Now it's okay. Okay. Share screen. Okay, on the subject of tourism, a quick fixer for year 2009. And in the year 2009, there were 447,890 tourist arrivals, where we earned $349.3 million US as foreign exchange through tourism. The earnings per tourist per day was $81.8 per day. Over the years, why I said 2009 is this is after the war. That's only that's the time that tourism got off ground. Until then, we had registered only around 400,000 tourist arrivals, which we registered way back in 1982. It was stagnant right throughout. And though tourism was supposed to contribute objectively as a foreign exchange earner for the economy, and create regional development, it did not take place over 2 decades due to the war. Over the years, if you come back to 2020, arrivals reaching 2.3 million arrivals, $3 billion. At that time, the earnings per tourist per day was $173. Well, unfortunately, with the Easter crisis and followed by the COVID outbreak, our arrivals took a roller coaster ride from 1.9 million going down to 194,495 arrivals by the year 2021. Even the earnings from 4.3 billion went down to $506 million US in the year 2021. The earnings per tourist per day was only $172. How are we faring this year? We are targeting 1 million tourist arrivals by the end of 2022 with a contribution of 1.8 billion US per tourist per day income of per tourist income $180 per day. As of now, we have reached 482,000 tourist arrivals with around 700 million as foreign exchange earnings. We will end the month of August with 500,000 tourist arrivals. I have done a forecast going up to 2027 to give you some idea what sort of a contribution tourism will be able to make towards the economy. Next year, we are planning to achieve 1,550,000 tourist arrivals, foreign exchange earnings of 2.9 billion, with a tourist spend of $1,900 during their stay in Sri Lanka. This will go up gradually up to 3 million tourist arrivals by the year 2027, with a contribution of $6.75 billion US to the economy at a rate of 2,002 of 10 days. Well, this is possible. Yes, it is possible, provided we create the correct climax. Even today, we have had discussions how best we are going to overcome certain bottlenecks which are there. Currently, there are airlines threatening to pull out of Sri Lanka. This is going to create a major problem because why? They are unable to find jet fuel for refueling. They are unable to repatriate what they have earned here. They are unable to pay in Sri Lankan rupees for services that are being provided at the airport, and so on. Of course, the load factors matter, and for an airline, it takes at least 6 to 8 months for them to decide on a route and get the route, divert flights which are coming to Sri Lanka, because we see with 1,500,000, they are going to have a shortage of air seat into Sri Lanka from the major generating markets. Right now, unfortunately, China is closed, from where we can expect about 250 to 300,000 tourist arrivals. And over the Aeroflot issue which we had, even Russia remains closed. But there are a few Russians coming via Middle Eastern countries and so on. Sri Lankan Airlines have stopped operating to Russia because there's an issue with the insurance cover, and we are left with a limited number of seats. Of course, there are other airlines like Turkish Airlines, where the cost is almost $1,000 more than coming on Aeroflot or on Sri Lankan when they were operating. So this is what we are planning over the next 5 years. We can make a contribution of 6.75 billion through tourism. Tourism was the third largest foreign exchange earner for the economy in the year 2018. Sri Lankans working abroad and making remittances. We are quite confident that we will be able to make for Sri Lanka by the year 2027. There are a few bottlenecks. I'll touch on that later. Is it possible for an economic contribution on tourism? Why do we state that it is possible to revive tourism? Let's take a look at global tourism. Global tourism in the year 2009 was 880 million. With a global tourism movements to South Asian region was only 21 million, and share of the South Asia and Pacific region was only 2.5 million. I will not bother to run through the years, but I'll get on to the next slide. And in 2018, when we recorded the highest, there were 1,403,000, 1,000, out of which the South Asian region, South Asian Pacific region had a 46% share, had 46 million, and the share of the South Asian and Pacific region was only 3.3%. 2020 and 2021, once again, the figures have gone down. And the projected in the coming years will be, by 2024, it will go up to 1,118 million with a share of 37 million for the region, which is only 3.3%. So when you look at global tourist movements, this was an industry that was indicating high growth and above average growth in the arrivals into the South Asian region. Yeah, by 2027, the UNWTO, United Nations World Tourism Organization, projects 1,500 million global tourist movements, out of which our region should be able to enjoy 64 million, which is a 4.5% share. Unfortunately, what Sri Lanka has enjoyed in the past, out of what the South Asian and Pacific region is getting, is only about 0.5%. So the potential is there for us to help ourselves to a greater share in tourist arrivals, which will assist us to achieve our targets in respect of foreign exchange earnings. Currently, Sri Lanka, with a room capacity of 47,442 rooms. There are 2,000 airlines, recreational service providers, tourist shops, and so on. We have provided 177,476 direct employment opportunities and another 180,451 indirect employment opportunities. Direct and indirect employment through the formal and informal sectors of tourism is around 3 million as of now. The total value of the tourist industry is estimated around 7,000 billion. And if we look at the current debts of the industry, it is just over 600 billion. The current debts are around 600 billion. Luckily, there's a moratorium which has been extended till end of the year, but we are sitting on a volcano. Will once again be in dire straits because with the accumulated interest component, they will find it extremely difficult to meet the liabilities. Current level of operations of the industry is around 18%. With 1,550,000 tourist arrivals, taking a room capacity of almost 45,000, the industry operational levels in the year 2023 will be, as you all know, for the industry to break even, for the industry to break even, one more, we need at least 40 to 45% occupancy. So servicing 600 billion, even if it is restructured with an average interest rate of almost 20%, will be the average interest rate. Next year too, the additional losses. Well, there are some bottlenecks that we need to look at and to be cleared in the coming years. The current debt crisis of the industry is prime. Then the working capital requirements of the industry. We have to make sure we compete with other destinations, maintaining quality and standards. And with the revival, the industry is going to need some sort of working capital. Currently, all lending institutions are rather reluctant to make any funds available for the tourist industry. Maintaining quality and standards when competing is important because post-COVID, most of our competing destinations are fighting for their fair share. Of course, as you know, about 3 months ago, the dollar, which was around 180 to 200, almost by 90-95%, and it is around 360. So the buying power of the foreigner or the visitor has gone up tremendously. Therefore, we have to create more opportunities for them to spend. Greater activity needs to be created, because though there will be an increase in tourist arrivals, there will not be a proportionate increase in the earnings if we do not create more opportunities for them to spend. Well, as we know, there are certain areas that are lacking, like we haven't gone in for upmarket tourist products like marine tourism, wellness tourism, and so on. We are focusing on providing new products, and also the nightlife, entertainment, and so on is lacking. Even if you take a destination like Sigiriya, Habarana, though we have about 2,500 rooms there, after 5:30 in the evening, we have not created opportunity for them to spend money. We can have cultural shows in the backdrop of to savor the local cuisine, create more opportunity for them to spend the money. And that way, we can try and increase the foreign exchange earnings substantially. The political uncertainty and the economic crisis is creating more problems. We need to create a conducive environment for foreign direct investment to come in. I should say this, unfortunately, we have tried to show exactly how tourism is benefiting the industry. For example, over the last 2 months, at any given time, we had about 25 to 30,000 tourists in the country, and the spend per day was around $5 million US. What we asked for by way of fuel to mobilize their movement was only about 3 to 3.5%. But we had immense problems in getting the fuel required to ensure that the tourist movements were uninterrupted. Finally, we managed to do it, I would say, to an extent of about 8. We are yet fighting to get the required diesel to keep the generators running. With the current power cuts, unless we provide the required basic comforts for the tourists, it will be short-lived. We have to handle these problems if we are to earn foreign exchange through tourism. Skilled manpower is going to be a continuing problem, because the industry skill levels is around 35% now, and also their skill migration for greener pastures. So we need to have this skills training going on a continuous basis, not only for the tourist industry, but even for those seeking foreign employment, which in turn will contribute by way of foreign exchange to the country. Minimizing foreign exchange leakages from the economy and ensuring total tourism earnings come into the economy. We have done some studies, and we feel that of the total tourist earnings, it's only about 70 to 75% that comes into the economy. Not coming. For example, if you take something like casinos, there are charter flights coming into Sri Lanka. These junket tours are sold elsewhere, where the money is collected outside. It's not remitted to Sri Lanka. Even the winnings are taken out of our economy. We have to bring in legislation to control such issues. Also, if you look at the travel agents, they will bring around 75 to 80% of the earnings into Sri Lanka, retaining their profits outside. Of course, when you look at certain, they are supposed to convert whatever foreign exchange comes into the country within 1 month into Sri Lankan rupees. That does not motivate anyone to bring in the foreign exchange through the proper channels. If someone brings in through Undiel or other channels, they
Mr.
get
Priyantha, you may have to shorten the presentation a bit.
Okay, sure.
Sure.
We are planning to introduce We have planned to expand tourism-related skills, improve services and facilities, qualitative upgrading, and so on. And I will end my presentation there and take up any questions during the question time. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Priyantha. Thank you very much for sharing your sentiments and for sharing those details. As I have mentioned, I was there at the OPA presentation also. I got a lot of information from that presentation also, which you have shared once again. Thank you very much for sharing the occupancy rates, specifically mentioning that we will be finding it difficult to break even, not only in this year as well as in the next year. Thank you very much once again for sharing your views, Mr. Priyantha. So now I would like to move to our next speaker for the day, Mr. Ashik Ali. He's the chairman of SLASCOM and director at Alliance. And Mr. Ali will talk about ICT and BPO growth sector to double exports and to build a knowledge economy. Over to you, Mr. Ali.
Thank you, Ruchira. Good evening to everyone who has joined us. Let me just briefly give a landscape of how the IT BPM sector in Sri Lanka operates. Give me a moment. So the sector has about if you can mute your mic, I think let me continue. So the sector has about 600 companies, of which about 20% cater to both domestic and export. And the companies export both software as well as services. Sizes range from startups all the way to very large companies which have 3,000-4,000 employees. And a large part of this whole ecosystem are made up of foreign captives operating their delivery and innovation centers in Sri Lanka. In 2021, last year, we estimated the export income to be around $1.7 billion. How we arrive at this estimate is through the number of people working in our companies, which is done through a survey with the ICT agency as well. And as well as we look at average bill-out rates, etc., and make this estimation. Mainly because unlike hard goods which are exported out of Sri Lanka, our exports are through the internet and there are no customs and custom entries, etc. But with the central bank introducing the ITRS in the banking system since of late July, hopefully we will now be able to capture some of the real-time foreign exchange earnings by our sector. There are about 90,000 people, IT professionals, as well as about 25,000 BPM professionals working in the sector. As per the EDB survey in 2020, we are the 4th largest exporter. The Census and Statistics Bureau estimated that we contribute 1.8% to the Sri Lankan GDP in 2021. A very key component of this is that we do a lot of 80 to 90% value addition. That's by our talent, which means we retain a very large portion of the export income in Sri Lanka. There is hardly any raw material that we need to import as such, except for some of these platforms and cloud infrastructure that we need to pay to deliver the solutions. Our vision is to achieve $5 billion by 2025. To achieve that, we will require about 200,000 workforce, which is nearly double of what we have now. We also want to catalyze 1,000 startups, which will create new companies, ideas, and innovations. Furthermore, we want to position Sri Lanka as a green IT destination going forward. So in 2017, the sector was identified one among 6 as a thrust sector in the formulation of the National Export Strategy through a multi-stakeholder engagement led by the Export Development Board and facilitated by the International Trade Center in Geneva. It was a comprehensive strategy and action plan covering attracting investments, market access, talent development, innovation and intellectual property, and enabling policies. The Island of Ingenuity brand for the IT BPM sector was launched, promoting 3 key value propositions. That is, as a creator of products and platforms through disruptive innovation and IP, gateway to fast-growing and highly popular South Asian markets using Sri Lanka as a beachhead, set up captive innovation and delivery centers using our unique talent profile and low attrition. This created the platform to attract more foreign companies to set up in Sri Lanka, for Sri Lankan companies to gain market access to foreign markets and buyers, inculcate talent attributes and values in future workforce, as well as attract students and undergraduates to a career in IT and BPM. The last 5 years, the industry has achieved a year-on-year growth of about 23%. The industry has kept growth momentum despite the crisis the nation faces in the recent years. The Easter bomb attack, COVID, the economic and political crisis since late last year has not affected the industry delivery capabilities. The sector has continued to meet delivery and investor commitments. Employment and wages have continued to grow. Majority of our employees have transitioned to work from home right from the beginning of COVID lockdowns in March 2020. The universities too made available local Zoom notes through the Learn platform, and together with the telcos offered access to education free of connectivity costs. This has kept the education pipelines also working for the industry. The Sri Lankan talent profile and sector attractiveness continues to attract growth investments, new businesses and new companies to set up here. The last 2 years, we have seen notable companies like HCL, Emapta, EYGDS, BCS Technologies that have invested and started operations and creating employment. These are just a few examples. We, as LASCOM, continue to take calls from potential captives, looking at Sri Lanka's attractiveness and helping them connect with government agencies, universities, education institutions, and real estate infrastructure providers in their due diligence process. The industry has put in place several business continuity measures for companies to navigate through some of the recent challenges. We work with DFCC and BOC banks to structure green financing to promote solar and other sustainable energy and transport for organizations and employees at attractive interest rates ranging from 15 to 17%. Working with off-grid solar solution providers to promote adoption by our workforce. We are promoting bike to work. Many of the officers are installing shower facilities to encourage this. We've aggregated several work locations around the country to provide seats with uninterrupted electricity and internet, enabling employees to work closer to their homes when they have power disruptions. We are working with Tourism Promotion Bureau to enable our members to use hotels in the city and closer to Colombo as our in-country BCP locations. These seats and spaces can be booked through our Powered Spaces supply and booking platform, which is already running. We are launching industry-facilitated shuttle service and transport pooling through a shared transport platform as well. All these initiatives, while increasing our resilience, will also address key components of our ESG goals using sustainable energy and employee well-being. These will make a national impact in reducing the outflow of forex for fuel imports as well. The notable challenge for the industry is an increase in attrition due to overseas migration. We are losing quality talent at the middle layer. To address this, the industry works through a number of programs with state and non-state universities to increase the capacity, relevance, and quality of the graduates they produce. We launched a program with Open University of Sri Lanka on a 10,000 graduate program last year, which has already started making available 2,000 plus interns after 1 year of study. So they are in a work-study mode. Another program will be launched with Sri Lanka Technological Campus this October for another 700 graduates. These will help bridge the 13,000 graduate shortfall the industry currently faces. We also work with the Vocational Training Authority, the National Youth Corps, all the major accounting bodies, including CMA, and other tertiary education institutions to attract students who don't have access to degree pathways. We have several bootcamp skilling programs to train this pool of students suitable for entry-level positions in the industry. Once they join the industry, they are then able to follow higher education pathways and certifications to grow their careers into high-income earning opportunities. A part of these graduates, non-graduate pool also choose to do freelancing earning foreign income, which is becoming an increasing trend. Early next year, we are planning to run a major career fair to attract 100,000 O-level, A-level students, undergraduates, and those following other IT-related qualifications. This will be a major platform to create awareness on opportunities in this sector, provide guidance on what study programs and qualifications to follow to be aligned to get employment, and also for recruitment by our companies. So what is the opportunity? Gartner projects global IT spending to be $4.5 trillion in 2022. Closer to us, India is envisioning this industry to be a $1 trillion industry by 2030. India, Philippines, Vietnam, Egypt, Malaysia, South Africa, and countries in Latin America and Eastern Europe, this sector has become a major contributor to their GDP and youth employment. Higher wages and entrepreneurship are creating new middle and upper income segments, raising the tide for other sectors of their economies. The pandemic accelerated digital adoption by society, businesses, and governments all over the world as it went into lockdowns. From government services, essential services, finance, supply chains to retail to people interacting with even each other, moved to digital platforms, creating an exponential demand for technology products and services, which created more demand for IT workers.
Mr. Ali, excuse me, you have roughly about 5 minutes.
Sure, I'll wrap it up soon. The Ukraine war was a major supplier of IT work for US and Western Europe markets, with a workforce close to 300,000 people. Due to the war, a large part of this workforce are displaced and work has got disrupted. This has added to the global shortage of talent. Now we see major economies grappling with inflation and recession. This is leading to even more businesses focusing on efficiencies through digitization and cost optimization, which creates more opportunities for offshore destinations like us, offering high quality talent and cost arbitrage. With an increasing supply of quality talent and its unique talent profile, Sri Lanka can attract a lot of this foreign exchange. We have a good stock of modern office, world-class connectivity for businesses to expand as well as attract new foreign companies to set up. The sector has been identified as a key trust sector, and successive governments in the past decade have lent support for its growth. They are advocating for more policy interventions that can attract more investment capital from venture capitals, private equity, and angel networks for scale-up companies and startups to grow and expand into foreign markets, to support capacity building programs in the state and non-state education sectors, and to enact policies, regulations, and enforcements in data protection, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, and blockchain digital currencies. This is an industry that has proven to be resilient and growing sector despite all the adversities Sri Lanka has faced in the recent past. Given the supply of talent and some of the policies required for the sector's growth, it will be a key economic and employment creator for Sri Lanka. With that, I'll wrap it up. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. Thank you very much for sharing your views. Actually, I must say, we as a professional body, we also work with the IT BPO sector to create job opportunities for our graduates. And we have recognized this sector as one of the main sectors to bring foreign exchange to our country. Thank you very much for your views. So ladies and gentlemen, now, of course, we have to move into the Q&A session. But before we start the Q&A session, let me now invite our panelists, Mr. Manil Jayasinghe, Country Managing Partner, Ernst & Young, and also he is a council member of CMA Sri Lanka and also the former president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka. Over to you, Mr. Manil. We would like to know from you the role of auditors, the role of audit profession in order to find a solution for debt restructuring problem.
Thank you, Ruchira. Thank you, Professor and the CMA for inviting me. You are asking me an impossible question, I think, as to what the role of auditor. I think we heard from the previous speakers, my partner Duminda, the Minister Iran, Vikramratna, and then from Ashik as well as Janta. We heard, Priyanka, sorry. We heard a lot about this whole equation. I think really gave the overview of the problem that we are facing. I can touch on some of the implications that will come about this whole restructuring, and from an audit point of view, what those implications will have in reporting financial numbers going forward from now onwards. So one of the key areas that this is going to happen is everyone is talking about the possible haircut, right? So one of the restructure, I think in the previous speakers mentioned, our debt is at 140% of GDP. We are unable to meet the cash flow requirements of settlement of the debt, plus we are unable to meet the cash flow requirements for our day-to-day essentials. So that's where we are today. So I think it is relatively obvious that there is going to be some form of a haircut on the debt. Now, in the restructure of debt, there are only sort of three possible scenarios, right? First one is you can say defer payment or get a moratorium and postpone the payments to some degree, so you can restructure that debt in order that the payments will get staggered and in the future. The second one is obviously taking a coupon cut. So like, say, for example, today, the government securities are going in excess of 30%. So I think Duminda illustrated that the servicing of this debt annually amounts to, say, 1/3. So if you cut that servicing, you will obviously save that outflow. So that's the second option. Of course, the last option, which everyone hopefully tries to avoid, is the capital cut. Now, in my view, ultimately the settlement of this will be a combination of the three. So there will be elements, there will be restructuring and postponement, there will be a haircut on probably the interest or the servicing part, and there may or may not be a haircut on the capital. So it will be a combination of these three finally. But this will all heavily dependent on the ability of the government and the ability of the government, central bank, and whatever it is, improving or supporting how our recovery is going to take place. World Bank has already indicated that this year the economy will contract by about 8%. I think government also has indicated to that effect. World Bank is also predicting next year to be a contraction. So then it will start to pick up. So the World Bank's, the latest thing that I saw, in order for us to come to even 2019 levels, it will take about 5 years. So that's where we are, and that is what is in store. There is a lot of debate about whether there will be the domestic debt will be restructured or various things. I think the minister pointed out this is an extremely dangerous and a slippery slope, if you want to call it that, trying to restructure the domestic. But it all depends on these negotiations, whether the foreign debt holders are likely to take a deeper cut at the expense of the domestic debt. So all these things will have to come out through negotiations. I think at some point, Minister, he mentioned today, I can't remember, but somewhere he had also mentioned that the domestic holders have already got cut. Because as you know, our value for money now, if you had 100 rupees, its buying power has now reduced to 50 rupees or even less, right? So already that impact has now happened in the domestic arena, even though physically we haven't gone and said our debt has been restructured and it has got a haircut or whatever it is, but the buying power, through the buying power, it has really reflected that cut. So we'll have to wait and see. Now, this whole situation of wait and see is creating a lot of issues from an audit profession point of view. I think the minister also mentioned about the vulnerability of our banking sector and the capital requirements in the event that some of these cuts take place. So for any economy to recover, the banking sector is an important sector, because at the end of the day, they are the ones who provide the finance and the capital and the money for businesses to either survive, continue, or expand. So if that sector is unable to give that level of support and is unable to lend, in other words, clearly the economic recovery is going to take time. So it's a chicken and egg scenario, right? By doing these things, it might hurt the financial services sector. If it hurts the financial service sector, their ability to lend to the industry businesses will be limited, and that limitation will in turn lead to a longer recovery period. So this is one critical issue I think we are faced with, and I think we need to be mindful. then also, given the fact that what is happening today, this high inflation rates, high exchange rates, the high interest rates, so these things are also creating issues from an accounting and a business point of view. Today, the high interest rates immediately results in impairment of your assets, because you are now discounting your future cash flows using a higher discount rate. So your carrying value or realizable value is going to come down. So there is immediately impact on long-lived assets that is going to come through. And now the problem from an audit perspective is, how do you estimate these things? These are all in the future, right? When you are having a stable economy, stable results, predicting the future or projecting the future becomes easy. When you have the degree of volatility that we are having today in the markets, that prediction is going to be rather tough. When we come to impairment in banks, for example, they use the ECL model, that is the expected loss model, right? Now, how do you predict the expected loss in this current environment? We know, obviously, in the past, we would have taken the historical information, then tweaked it in order to arrive at the future. Today, can you tweak the historical information to arrive at the future? With this scenario, if in the past, with the normal economic scenario, if 10% of your businesses fail, today, can you predict how many percent of businesses are going to fail in the next 2 to 3 years? So all this becomes very challenging from an audit profession point of view. Then also, I just touch on this from an audit point of view. The things that are happening in our country is also creating a lot of problems. So today, at what price do you buy something? You have black market, you have all sorts of different parallel markets. What is the price that you would buy something at? Prediction of the exchange rate is a huge challenge. So all these things in turn creates a lot of challenges from an audit point of view. Even if you say that you have purchased something, at what price have you purchased it? Price volatility is so high today. Today the inflation is 60% or so, and it is expected to go up to 60%, and hopefully it will level out after that, because I think the last piece in the equation was sorted out. That is the kerosene subsidized price. It was sorted out. So hopefully now there is nothing more to adjust, and therefore it might start to stabilize. And that's what the governor also has said. So I think I am also very hopeful that that might happen. But from a debt restructuring point of view, what I mentioned to you, these 3 options are the 3 options that has to be played around. And to the degree of how you play these options will depend on our ability to demonstrate the future generation of wealth or value or whatever you want to call it, and how sustainable that generation would be in the context of the debt that we are carrying. So that's the primary cause that we had to really look. And from a society point of view, I think Duminda quite rightly said, I think we are all part of the problem. We may not think so, but we are. We have all enjoyed, whether it's coming from the subsidized fuel, whether it's coming from subsidized electricity. We have all enjoyed it at some point. So I think probably going forward, we will all feel the pain as well. There won't be any choice in the matter. So just to conclude, as I said, from an auditing point of view, there are some far-reaching implications which this debt restructure will probably indicate. Now, one of the other biggest problem is the latest news we get is that these negotiations with the IMF is not easy. They are somewhat difficult. If that is the case, they may not necessarily reach consensus as fast as what we think. Then whether, even though there are indications or there have been statements to say that we will reach some consensus we will get some disbursement by the end of the year. If that delays by a few months, what happens? So these are all the uncertainties that are going to create. So I am sorry that I'm unable to give solutions. I can only give you the possible solutions. And then I think the minister is here. I want to say sometimes the politics also doesn't help. You know, I'm sure for political reasons, various statements are also being made, but it doesn't help. But today, I think everyone has to get together in order to first put our economy back on a solid footing first. After that, I think the politics can come into play. But if we don't have an economy, none of us have a country to live with. So that is, I think, the fundamental thing that we need to address. And so definitely, when it comes to bridging this budget, the first part is the negotiation part. Second part is, I think Domingo mentioned about the gap that we have to bridge this. Well, what are the choices you have? So you can either go and borrow, or you can sell some assets, right? To get a short-term infusion. Those are the only two, as far as I know, that you can do. Now, borrowing option is the option that has got shut down to some extent because of our credit rating and all the negotiations that are going through. So and the sort of soft default that we have done. So then the only thing would be to sell assets temporarily to bridge this gap. Once we bridge the gap and then our economy gets moving, then we'll have to decide from where we are going. So in the selling of the assets, there are two options. One option is to sell assets to get inflows. Other option is to stem the hemorrhaging. Hemorrhaging means the bleeding. So you have institutions which are bleeding money. You have institutions which are making money, but those probably the institutions that one can sell and earn money, get money. So for example, who's going to invest in a loss-making institution? So those have to be packaged. So first off, so there are two options that you have to do in this equation. One is to stop the hemorrhaging. The other one is to infuse money. So it will be a combination of these two that has to happen in order for us to, because we have a big hole here now, we have to fill it. So how are we going to fill this hole? First thing is to prevent the hole from getting deeper. The next thing would be to fill the hole. So that's what I see, this whole debt crisis and whatever you can do. So our choices are obviously limited. And it has got further limited because certain choices that we have are not open. Like, you know, going and borrowing money would have been one option, but that option seems to be somewhat shut. Right? So, and also we have somewhat got caught to this geopolitics a little bit here and there. When one wants to do something, the other doesn't want to, and we are sort of caught in the middle of this whole equation. But unfortunately, that's where we are. So we have to navigate that through that, how should I say, maze, and see. So everything depends on how these negotiations are done and how we are able to convince our creditors that we as a country will be able to bounce back and meet our obligations, and thereby giving that relief that is necessary for inflows to come into our country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Manil. Thank you. Thank you for explaining very clearly the impact of high interest rate and inflation that which are affecting drastically to the asset values, and also for explaining the impact of interest rate for the impairment of long-lived assets. Thank you very much again for sharing your views. Now, may I request all our panelists to switch on your cameras to begin the Q&A session?
Ruchira, I just want to make a small comment.
Yeah.
I think Domingo has to go, I think. But, you know, Mr. Iran Vikramaratne is here. I would like him to comment on what Manil said, you know, because there were very important areas that he touched on. Can I invite Mr. Iran Vikramaratne to comment on what Manil spoke on? Yeah.
Iran, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, I'm not very sure what specific things you were referring to on what Manil said.
He spoke on many things.
Yeah, he spoke on many things, but I certainly would want to make one comment, and that is, you know, beyond numbers. And that comment was that he said that, you know, that the economy, everybody needs to get together on the economy, you know, and not to be separated because of the politics. Something to that effect, Manil, maybe not exactly that, but something to that effect. I think it's an important thing to actually surface, right? the important thing to surface is that there is a dichotomy between politics and economics. And people in economics and in finance and in business, right, generally and obviously try to highlight the economy and say the most important thing to fix is the economy. And I think that's where the dichotomy is. If I put it another way, if you ask somebody, how has this crisis come about? Is it the political crisis created by the economic crisis, or was an economic crisis created by a political crisis? And so it depends where you actually start, right? And here I differ with a lot of people. I think Sri Lanka's primary problem is a political crisis, which has created an economic crisis. And some argue the other way around. For example, if you're running a business, right, and if you're running it successfully, businesses can be run successfully in democracies. They can also be run successfully in dictatorships. You see, it can be, because some dictatorships, or near dictatorships have also given good financial and economic results. So I think that's why I raised this issue that, we first choose our way of life, right? And then we obviously need to gear our economic and business and financial well-being to that way of life. So life has certain values, and democracy is one of the values. We certainly, because you raised that, I'm just saying, we certainly are very conscious of the financial crisis the country is facing, the economic crisis the country is facing. So we can't play the role of a traditional opposition, sitting there and opposing. But certainly we oppose some things. We oppose arbitrary arrests. We oppose the use of the PTA in the present context, right? And we are saying, don't do those things. We say, get rid of the 20th Amendment. We go back to what you were elected on. We were elected on the 19th Amendment. Just go back there. So those are things that and then the other thing is, I would just add to that, is the whole anti-corruption issue. You see, the anti-corruption issue is not just an economic issue. Because it's my view that Sri Lanka's financial and financial crisis is not really corruption-driven. Corruption, there's a percentage that somebody referred to, I think Duminda or somebody said, we don't know what that percentage is, in the debt, maybe 10% or something. And he referred to, I think, the governor of the central bank or somebody. So we don't know. But the anti-corruption is absolutely important because of a governance issue, more than the actual numbers of it and all these laws. We have been talking to government, bring the assets and liabilities, make it public, so that if there is a question about my assets and liabilities, Auditor General can actually audit me, right? Being a public figure, whether you're a politician or high official. Make the CBOC, right, the Anti-Corruption Bribery Commission, independent. It's not independent. 28 years of CBOC, and not a significant politician or high public official has actually been put behind bars, right? So it has to be made independent. As stolen assets recovery, you and World Bank are working on it. Sri Lanka needs to bring its law. I'm saying the first two I referred to, bring it in September, because they are both ready. If you are serious, government is serious about cleaning it up, bring it in September. Stolen assets recovery, give it 3 months, because the law has to be, there are a lot of work to be done on the law. Then independent public prosecutor is needed. The AG advises me, I was minister, I steal, and then the AG is supposed to prosecute me. Governments change, what happens? Sometimes the case is withdrawn. This nonsense needs to stop. We need an independent public prosecutor like some of the countries which have a clean record. This needs to be brought in, and it needs to be brought in quickly. With these changes, we need to do it. These are good signals for the economy and finance, very good signals. And then if I won't go into the details because of lack of time, Doing Business Index, Global Competitiveness Index, Corruption Perception Index, ICT adoption. Thank you for that ICT presentation. I was really encouraged by it, because ICT is immune to some extent from external shocks, unlike all the other industries. That's why it's very, very important. And then enforcing contracts. On all these indexes, Sri Lanka is pretty low. We won't go into the details. We need to look at how can we actually move up these indexes. So the politics is important. You see, the politics is important, and therefore, we will support the government on the economic front, on the economic reforms, we will support it. But the government must show goodwill on the politics as well.
Thank you, Aaron. I just have one more question for you. This is really what Lee Kuan Yew did, So I want to say how you are going to react to that. Now, Lee Kuan Yew, he said, we will pay one salary. including traveling allowance, housing, all allowance, fuel, telephone bill, which is applicable not only to government servants and politicians. I think that this should be the best thing to cut all our expenses. What is your opinion on that?
I'm so thankful, Mr. Waterwell, that you raised this issue, because there is so much, right, of misinformation on this issue. I believe in what Lee Kuan Yew said. One principle, transparency, right? I am not a believer in giving a duty-free permit. The duty-free permit at 10 million rupees, which was somebody who sold it for 10 million rupees, told me some time ago, right? Divided by 60 months, 5 years, it's only 133,000 rupees a month. There's no transparency. Get rid of it. People think otherwise you're being given millions of rupees, and give them a vehicle. Like in a private company, from middle to higher management, we get a vehicle while we are there. Give them a vehicle. That creates transparency. The first principle, I agree, transparency. But this nonsense about remuneration must stop. Because you said it, in my briefcase, I always carry this. This is my salary statement, right? And I'm putting it up here. I'll read it to you because you can't see it. Monthly salary, 54,000. Entertainment allowance, 1,000 rupees. Telephone allowance, 50,000. Sitting allowance, 17,500, right? Then office, to run the office, 100,000. Fuel allowance, 46,000. And then there's something called transport. Everything added, 279,000 rupees, right? I'm told I'm only the second corporate, not private sector. Doctors and lawyers who practice have come. Second corporate CEO of a public quoted company in the Sri Lankan Parliament, 73 years history. We may be wrong. There may be a third person, Karuja Suri and myself. Corporate people are needed in the Sri Lankan Parliament, not just professionals. We need also corporate professionals, people who have worked in a system, policies, processes, these things. Even the concept of a conflict of interest is not understood by MPs. I don't look down on them because we are exposed to it. They haven't been exposed to it. So we need them in. And I went in at 50 years. We need to bring qualified people at 40 years. They have only started paying their house mortgage. They have 2-3 kids. They have to educate them. They save between the ages of 40 and 50. How can they come on this? They just can't come on this, right? And we need to attract them. So I am making out the case. Others don't, because if you tell others, they will say, take up in the they will also say, salary ka toren hai kiya. But we are going to remain in parliament. How can you do that and honestly live? So we know that we are creating really a corrupt system. That is why I take the contrary view and argue that we need to get the right people in there. When I entered this, it was 1 day's pay as corporate CEO of a public quoted company. So I'm glad that you raised it, because I can't say this everywhere because people misquote this thing. We need professionals to come in.
Thank you, Mr. Iran. I actually have what I was telling is maybe as a member of parliament you are doing it, but if you go to ministries, if you go to the ministers, they have so much of options, telephone bill, their fuel bill, no control, That's why I think Lee Kuan Yew say, pay them one salary. As you say, it's not a low salary, pay them a good salary, and then that's all. Let them manage with whatever they want to do, manage with that salary. So I think that's okay. Okay, over to you, Ruchira. You can ask.
Thank you, Professor. Honorable MP, Mr. Iran Vikramratne, this question is also for you. So what do you think? I want your unbiased opinion on this. Now, with the privatization discussions that are going on, there is resistance. There are various resistances coming for these privatization efforts. As a politician in the opposition camp, what do you really think about these protests? Do you think despite these protests, the efforts should continue?
I think that we should try to understand where that is coming from, right? We have to understand that where that is coming from, and we have to address that issue. So it's very difficult for me to generalize, right? But if I were to make some general comments, right? We can't run state-owned enterprises with the public taxpayers' money, right? And we are subsidizing it, and the poor are paying for it. We can't do that. A general principle is all state-owned enterprises must run on profitability. If the government decides to give a subsidy, the principle is that subsidy must not be passed on to the state-owned enterprise. It must be in the national budget. And that is a government decision, and the budget must take responsibility. All public officials must be held responsible for running their institutions profitably. And if the government decides to give a subsidy, it should come into the state budget. So therefore, if we are going to apply those principles, right, then private sector management is very useful. Just a quick anecdote. I was in charge for a short while of Sri Lankan Airlines. I get a call one day from basically the head of finance, and then I get the CEO online. What was the request? Basically saying that a minister was on his way, whether the Sri Lankan Airlines could be just held up for a few minutes because he has got late leaving Colombo. And that phone call was the last call I got, because I said, please never call me again. Sri Lankan Airlines is a business. You run it. You don't even stop it for 1 minute, even for me, who is the minister in charge of this subject. In that year, Sri Lankan Airlines won 2 awards for being the most punctual airline in the world, not in Asia, in the world, the most punctual airline. And their cost of delays in that month, it was April, it was like they had to pay like $560,000. The next month, it dropped to $61,000. Now, that can't depend on individuals being there. We have to put the system right. The only way to put the system right in that example is that you have to have private sector management of Sri Lankan Airlines. There is no other way you are going to do that. You can't depend on the right person sitting there and the individual. The system needs to be put right. And there are methods in restructuring that, methods that it can be done. But I think the time has come for us to talk honestly and openly of how the private sector and the government should work together. Only for national defense, food security, right, and energy security, we think government ownership, we can think of it. But virtually in everything else, we can have public-private partnerships, or we can give it to the private sector. And I think we need to be open about it.
Thank you, sir. So on the same lines, now there's a question in the Q&A session. This attendee is asking, in order to raise dollars, in order to raise much needed dollars, whether we can go for a private government partnership agreement, especially when it comes to power generation sector of CEB. So that this person is suggesting global plant manufacturers will come in and they will bring dollars to the country. So I would like to know your views and also the views of others on this.
Yeah, there's a debate that's coming on in Parliament on Monday because of the prices were increased. And there is no one answer. But we all know, right, that Sri Lanka's energy policy has really been messed up, right, by not necessarily only politicians, but officials as well. We all know that, high-level energy, right, unit could be produced at, basically 5-6 rupees. And then hydro, that is, big hydros. And then the smaller unit things that can be done at 15-16 rupees. And then thermal energy at the margin, we're going at 80 to 100 rupees at the margin. And if you take the average, it's much less. So sustainable energy, right? What has happened? More than 1,000 projects of sustainable energy approved by the Energy Authority, Sustainable Energy Authority, haven't been given a PPP by the Ceylon Electricity Board. 4,000 megawatts have been basically halted over a 2-year period. What's going on here? This is unacceptable. Monopolies are unacceptable, whether they are public or private. They are unacceptable. And we can't get away from that. And we can see that here. So therefore, one is policy is not determined by the CEB. Policy is determined by a government. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa clearly stated his policy in his document, and that was for sustainable energy. But when the CEB put forward its proposal, it didn't reflect the government's policy statement. So it's not who is in power, right? Policy must be set by government. The people who are doing it must basically come up with a plan to do it. And they didn't come up with a plan. And that plan had to be rejected. And again, they have to re-give it. So this must stop. So sustainable energy has to go up. The balance has to go up. It will bring the price of energy down. and therefore private suppliers will come up. I will go one step further and say CEB needs to be unbundled. It needs to be unbundled because, right, lots of cries for green energy. Even today in factories and things, people are looking for green energy. And international, sometimes buyers had to sign off saying there's no child labor. Earlier, when I was a banker, I had to sign off saying there's no child labor. Now people want to sign off saying green energy is being used for consumption. So if somebody, if A is producing and wants to sell it to B, right, then CEB is only Uber, just transferring it that they can charge for it. We should set this area free. So there are different ways in which it can be done. There's no one solution. But in principle, if we accept the principle, and here, if the government goes down that road, this is the first time that you will find an opposition speaking in support of it.
Thank you, sir. I would like to know the views of others also in our panel. Mr. Manil?
Sorry, Richard, views on what?
This person is suggesting, Mr. Manil, in order to bring dollars to the country, that we should go for a private government partnership agreement. Especially when he's mentioning about the power generation sector, he's saying, of course, in this sector, 49% of the shares can be issued to the private sector so that we can get some dollars coming in.
Yes, definitely. I think the minister also quite rightly said it's high time. This proposal has been there for centuries, or when I say centuries, for a long time. This whole equation about not breaking up, but dividing the power sector into generation, transmission, and distribution. Now, if that happens, the generation, these hydro dams and all, that can be owned by the government because it's property or whatever it is. Either it can own by it, it can partially privatize it or do whatever they want. The transmission network, if that is probably done properly, then I think what the minister said, you can have power generators plugging onto the system. Then power the others on the other side, those people can sell the power to whomever they want. So that kind of thing also can be done. But one of the issues that will happen is some of these things will take a bit of time to get it off the ground. CEB, this process has to happen first before you can bundle it and put it. So I think in order to bring in that foreign income, the first part is you have to go for the low-hanging fruit. So there will be certain entities that are already ready for, I won't want to use the word privatization, but for sale, right? So maybe we shall have to go down that road. Then certain institutions, we may have to make them ready. And then as this person says, that you can go for various models as to how you want to raise that capital. Whether you want to go for 49-51% split or bring in new investments in where they can plug onto the system and then generate power and offload, whatever the mechanism, those can be done. But CEB part will be, I would think, will be somewhat, might take a little bit of time because you have to do some preliminary structuring prior to going there. So I think the minister has now appointed a committee or whatever it is, so they will come up hopefully with the suggestions and we can move on there. But there are some other entities which can easily be offloaded, and then maybe you can raise the capital or whatever it is. So those are the strategies the government will probably have to look into in this current crisis. In order to, as I told you earlier, I said you have to. In order to survive today, we have to bring in money. So the only way to bring in money is to offload some assets. And the next part is probably address these hemorrhaging institutions, CB, CPC, Sri Lankan Airlines, Water Board, Transport Board. So there are about, I think the other day I read in the papers, about six institutions which contribute to the largest losses in the system under the government. So those hemorrhaging will have to be stemmed or stopped in some form. So you have to bring in money, stop the hemorrhaging, so thereby going forward. But these are not going to be, some of these solutions may be temporary solutions because we have to first survive today. And then we will have to go into more permanent, medium-term solutions as we go as a country.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Manil. Mr. Priyanda, this question is specifically on tourism. This question, this attendee is asking why the Tourism Promotion Board can't make use of ambassadors to do various promotions in those countries rather than conducting road shows by spending a lot of money?
We have looked into it, Ruchira. It will take place shortly because there's an ambassadors forum in Sri Lanka. We have been having discussions with them to have a desk at all missions abroad. You're quite correct because today the return that road shows bring is minimal based on the expenditure we incur. So we have taken a shows planned for India end of this month, which have been temporarily put on hold. So we will be concentrating more in building capacity, at least of a few officers at foreign missions, and through them promote Sri Lanka. Also, we are cutting down on participation at fairs and exhibitions. We will participate at the most important fairs and exhibitions like ITB Berlin, WTM in London, and so on, because it's so expensive right now. We have to look at the cost benefits. We are down to it. Also, if I may come back to your earlier question on power generation and foreign FDI, it might are signed in Sri Lankan rupees. With the dollar appreciating, what they get when they have to remit their earnings will come down further. Also, they are not prepared to sign any foreign power purchase agreements in dollars. And if they do that, it will be to our...
Mr. Priyanta, we are losing you. We can't hear you.
Yeah. Did you hear the last part? Because at the rate, if we encourage entering into a power purchase agreement in dollars, it will be to our disadvantage because we will have to remit more, and the unit price, which is somewhere around 20 rupees, now it's subject to go up in a couple of weeks, we won't be able to afford. But we'll have to look at a different mechanism unless they are prepared to divest the earnings onto other ventures in Sri Lanka or something like that. But directly investment, foreign investment in power purchasing, like solar power and so on, might not happen due to this reason.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Ben. Now, Mr. Ben, on the same note, now you have mentioned in your presentation that Sri Lanka is becoming an affordable tourist destination. But if we continue to price goods and services in dollars, will they truly get the benefit?
Sorry, come again. I couldn't hear your last part.
If we continue to price certain goods and services in dollars,
I'm not getting
dollars, will they get the benefit?
Yes, they will definitely get the benefit because, say, for example, what they bought for 1,000 rupees about 3-4 months ago, they can buy it for 650 rupees right now. And their buying power is very much greater. Say, for example, they haven't been hampered by the dollar appreciating against the rupee where the airfare is concerned, because they used to buy it in foreign currency. They continue to buy it in foreign currency. That way, it hasn't gone up. But it's for the locals who are going out, it's almost double the airfare. So for the foreigner, it doesn't impact that much, but they will definitely benefit. This becomes a value for money destination for them. Say, for example, an Indian rupee will fetch 5 rupees in Sri Lanka, which is good value for money. And we can also tap other market segments in India. We have been concentrating only in a limited number of markets. Recently, the minister was in India and he addressed 200. It's not we, but and they have already started to generate business from Gujarat, which was not tapped in the past. And the Gujarat population is fairly large. I think it's almost 3 times of the Sri Lankan population. So we haven't gone into many markets, even in India, we haven't tapped potential market segments.
Yeah, Mr. Priyanta, I get your point on airfare, but then what about the hotel rates? Hotels keep charging them on dollar rates.
Yes, hotels keep charging them on dollar rates, but the dollar rate has not increased. Say, for example, in Sri Lanka today, you can get a 3-star hotel for about $65 to $70 bed and breakfast. I'm going back to what Professor said in his opening remarks. We have to be concerned regarding the cost. We should know exactly where it is. If you take a 3-star room cost, if you are selling it at $65, roughly 22% or around 5,500 will be your direct cost component, the direct cost. And also 50%, 48%, which leaves us an operational profit of only 30%. That's why I made the point that if interest rates keep on escalating, which is around 26, 27% now, there's nothing in it for the investors. On the other hand, we find there are a lot of foreigners coming in looking for bargains in Sri Lanka. The ultimate result is once again leakages. All the profits that they will make in 2 or 3 years will be going out of the country. As I pointed out earlier, the skills deficiency, they will bring in labor from Bangladesh, India, and other parts, and that money too will go out of the country. So the objective of having tourism as a foreign exchange earner for the economy will be lost if we allow that to happen, where the government has to realize, come up with certain packages to assist the industry to get over these difficult times.
Thank you, Mr. Priyanka. Mr. Ali, very quickly, tell me now, we know in our country, we have so much, we have a lot of IT professionals and also finance professionals who are ready to work in the IT BPO sector. What other facilities or support that you need from the government to take this sector forward?
Yeah, when it comes to finance professionals, yes, there is a fair large amount of addressable pool. It's just that they don't see a career in the BPM industry, so to speak, until very recent times. They would traditionally go into corporates or the banking sectors, etc., as a career choice, opposed to coming into a BPM setup, because there are a lot of connotations about what this job is and their career growth in that. So we need to educate, create awareness around that to attract more of the professionals. In fact, we have a number of legal companies here, say they're doing legal work for foreign markets. Again, this is the conundrum that they have, is that legal professionals don't really think of this type of work as legal work, right? They would like to go into practice or into a legal firm to do other type of work. So there is a lot of awareness that we need to create. But on the IT side, it's not, there has never been a supply issue. For the last, supply issue means there has never been an adequate supply. For the whole last decade plus, the only time we had a equilibrium between supply and demand was in 2009 and 2010 because of the global financial crisis, which affected a lot of economies, and it created loss of demand. But since then, all economies that have picked up, and even during pandemic, as I said, the digitizations have accelerated to such an extent that it put pressure not only in Sri Lanka. I mean, we have a whole number of people from companies from India coming and asking whether they can set up shop here to manage attritions in India. So this is where we need to work with government as well as private sector education providers in making sure there is an adequate number of people coming in. So one of these things is to also look at, especially when you go to rural, people, especially the influencers, school teachers, principals, parents, still look at traditional careers for their children, and it's a big pressure point. We need to go into those areas and show them what a career in here is, and we have the material. We have even people who have come here, their lifestyle changes, their earning capacity. We have a lot of things. We work with Rotary, Sarvodaya Fusion, all these organizations which have grassroots level access to these people in creating that awareness. From the government side, we saw recently the education minister also now talking about bringing foreign university here. During the previous government as well, there was a concerted effort to bring foreign universities here, because there is a huge leakage of foreign exchange for our young people going and studying abroad as well. Now, if we do that as a first step, stop that leakage, where Sri Lankan students here, especially those who are following English curriculum education, who are ideally suitable to work in our industry, and we pay just as much as any other emerging destination would pay in terms of wages, and they have a better lifestyle. To retain that talent here, make them study, get their full degree in here, and work here for at least for some time before they go. I'm not by any means saying that going out is not a good thing, because if you look at the accounting profession, in the last 30, 40 years, the number of accounting professions who have gone abroad and created a good name for Sri Lankan accounting professionals. Some of them are in very big finance posts. So similarly, a number of these companies coming to set up here also have touch points of working with Sri Lankan IT professionals in their own companies in a foreign country. So it's a good thing that we have, but we need to manage the supply constraint as well as how to balance this out. So we welcome that initiative where we set up these universities here, give them policy as well as infrastructure support, as well as then turning this into even a regional hub, so to speak, to bring people to come and study in Sri Lanka, because we have a lovely environment. The tourism product is there. There is no reason why they can't come here. And, the whole job profile of working also has changed now, especially in our industry. Remote working is the norm now. So even if you're working for a JP Morgan Chase in the US, you can still work in Sri Lanka for that same company. And now the visa regimes are also changing to support that, right? So I think we are at an inflection point where if we get some of these policy pieces and the supply pieces right, we have a very good future in this sector.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ali. Honorable MP, Mr. Eran Vikramaratne, I would like to finish our discussion with this question to you. This attendee is asking, isn't it viable to hand over or to subcontract the auditing of state institutions to one of the global audit firms after following the due process, of course?
I can't answer such questions with people like Duminda and Manil in the panel. No, I think certainly a country needs its Auditor General. I think there's no question about it. And maybe there are things that should be done to increase capacity and so forth. But I'm all for using the international audit firms, right, by the Auditor General. You see, I mean, we all know when we do things, right, sometimes we directly do things and sometimes we use partners in actually doing things because we think that there are certain advantages in doing that, you see. Efficiencies, advantages, knowledge, sometimes technology, depending on the area, but in auditing as well. So I would say that there is room for that. And I think there may be areas in which the government does it. They might be able to answer that more than me.
Mr. Manil, would you like to share your views?
Actually, I think the Auditor General does outsource certain parts of audits or certain audits, or like to the private sector, the international audit firms. So they do that at the moment. But there are certain things, obviously, they don't do, like auditing of ministries and departments and things like that. That is handled by the Auditor General. But, where the SOEs are concerned, where they don't have, I suppose, either adequate resources or technical resources where they can maybe they are lacking certain areas, they do outsource. So I don't think that's an issue. I'm sure the question is more towards the ministries and
yes, state institutions.
Like that. But there, I think you need to be careful because whether the external audit from an outside point of view can bring value, because you have to be very knowledgeable about the government procedures. These ARs, FRs, all sorts of, there are a lot of, so Auditor General is generally very, I would say very competent and knowledgeable about all these things. One of the issues probably might have been the independence of the Auditor General without any outside political interference and things like that, which now I think under the National Audit Act, that part is also sort of, I think, addressed to some extent. So going forward, I think, meaning I believe that there is a reasonably strong audit function. It's just that sometimes maybe there is some interference in that whole process, but I think certain auditor generals have been rather, how should I say, open and commented on various things. So with that alone is not going to help the situation. I think Minister also addressed this issue. Some of it is also, it's a people. It's about, it's like setting the tone at the top type of thing, and sometimes the lack of knowledge of some of these people of business ethics or transparency requirements, because they may not have had exposure to some of these things. Yes, so that also, I think, creates the whole problem. So meaning, I'm sure audit can't be the ultimate, how should I say, answer to everything. So there is a whole ecosystem that has to be created, and hopefully we are moving towards that ecosystem with the constitutional changes and various things. Because over the years the system has been put in place, but the real problem if they are talking about government is, I don't know, my observation is primarily on procurement. And how it is dealt with within that procurement. Correct. So maybe and then there's a lot of judgment, subjectivity, and things like that involved in that, where people can creep through. So that is probably where some mechanism has to be brought in my view, from what I have seen. The audit itself, I'm not too sure whether it's going to solve the problem.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Malla. Of course, we don't have Mr. Dumindu Hulangamo to get his views. So now I would like to thank all our panelists who are here with us today. So to present the closing remarks, may I now very respectfully invite President of CMA Sri Lanka, Lakshman Matawala.
Thank you, Ruchira. I think you've done an excellent job. But let me comment on that last one on the Auditor General, Actually, Auditor General gives very good reports. The problem is that they are not implemented. Whatever he points out, we find either in the COPE or in the government now, you find that they are not implemented. So this is one big drawback that we have, that these things are not implemented. As a result, some of the reports that are made by them are not being made use of. But I also want to point out another important thing. For the Auditor General to do a good job, we must have strong finance directors in all government ministries. So without that, you see, then if he's a strong person, that is compulsory. I think in the UK, they have done it in all the ministries, qualified, professional, chartered or management accountants. We don't have to bring from UK. We have the local people who are available here. They should be given in charge, and they should be responsible. And if necessary, maybe responsible to the finance ministry, and maybe not even to the secretaries if they want to have very independent one. But that is a must. I think all the Auditor General's reports would depend on the operational staff. If the operational staff do not do the work, because we are now all thinking of Auditor General's report, but it's not that. It's the skill that is required. Now that skill was spoken of earlier in the IT area, but I just want to tell you that, now that Mr. Iran Vikamaratan is here, today we have two types of bodies. One is the universities. Then we have the other one, which are the not non-university tertiary educational institutions set up by Act of Parliament. Today, we are not getting any recognition. Now, the Institute of Chartered Accountants, the CMA, the HR, can educate 50,000 people. That is what we can do. But government can't make them. Everything they say university is the wrong thing that they are doing. So, in fact, I just saw this, when our act was debated in 2009, the Minister of Higher Education, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, many of them stated that this new body will bring a new tertiary education. But no one is talking of tertiary. Everything they want to go to university. But we are professional bodies that will give the practical experience. Then the other thing I just want to tell Mr. Ashik also, we have very good programs, If you look at the Colombo University, if you look at the Moratuwa University, but what is lacking is the strong public-private partnership. If you have a public-private partnership, You see, if you bring another foreign university, we are not having any dollars at the moment. No, we can do this. We educate these people, and then the foreign direct investment will be brought by these people. We don't have to spend dollars. They will, once the people are educated, then they will bring in the dollars, especially now like in the IT field. So I want to tell that the government is not using, we are doing on our own, but the government is really not making use of this Act of Parliament tertiary educational institution. If they do that, I think a lot of the problems will be sorted out, because most of them will be getting training in the private sector. They are ready for employment. Even for the lower down jobs, we set up what is called the accounting technicians. What are they doing? They are employing A-level people. Why do they want to get A-level? Here we are training people at technician level. They are qualified accounting staff. Even the World Bank, the ADB, they want those people to go and prepare the accounts so that the government ministries will have proper thing. So I think the government, it's not the government, it's the government ministries, the secretaries, they are not looking at all these things. Everything they say, get a degree, get a degree, get a degree. That is not the case. They must use this legal tertiary educational institutions which will help them. So I just thought that I will change it, but I think public-private partnership, I'm sure our Mr. Iran is also for public-private partnership, because if we do public-private partnership, a lot of these problems can be sorted out. The shortage of foreign exchange, bringing in more foreign exchange, even efficiency, the productivity, the getting rid of corruption, getting rid of wastage, all this could be done because better management will be brought in. Now, no one is talking of management. Management is really the essence of it. Professionals are there, we need management. Management, our country's main problem is that there have been no management, mismanagement, either in the finance area, in the any other areas, it is all mismanagement. So we need to produce very good managers, and also they should be accountable. If they are not accountable, they will do anything. No. Now there have been so many things that have been happening. No. Who is accountable? Who was responsible? Like Mr. Iran mentioned, we had the that CMA, no one made responsible, no accountability. So I think these are some important areas. But today we had a very good discussion. Of course, overcoming the debt crisis. Now we have to see how we can. I know a lot of people will have to take, will have to make a lot of sacrifices. Maybe the main thing is the foreign exchange. So if everyone wants to use the fuel on the same basis that they did earlier, that is not correct. We have to all make cuts. If that's why I said, if you tell everyone use the public transport, get it organized. Because public transport is just something just going as on the wheel, but they must have a very organized way, a good timetable, some authority that should come into it, otherwise the real things will not come. I'm just telling because I'm sure that these are matters that can be spoken of, especially in the parliament. These are not new, but I think the timetable is then even the railway, because the other thing is we don't want the public inefficiency resulting in this going to the society. They will want to increase the price, but we know that there is no efficiency, that wrong decision-making has put trouble onto the society. So ultimately, we have come up with this concept of societal costing. It is ultimately the society will have to bear all these costs. Even this debt crisis, society has to bear. So that means they have to suffer everything. So I think today's discussion was very good. So let me thank, of course, Duminder from the Chamber of Commerce, because they have to come out. If the Chamber of Commerce gets hold of all the exporters, what I'm saying is, if they summon the BOI, all the export companies are there, tell you double your exports. We will give you whatever that you want. Then we are getting the foreign exchange inside. That is how things should work, not people. We can't see anyone happening that way. Because I am telling, because I have done these things 20 years in the public sector, losing corporations made positive because of efficiency, new technology. So these are things that have happened. Honesty, integrity. Now, these are very essential. Otherwise, you play out, you will not get anything. So Duminder, I think, has a very major role to play in this, to get the chamber to come out and then say that we can work, we can give the foreign exchange. Already they are doing it. And of course, the role of politicians, I think, Honorable Iran Vikramath, I think I must thank you, because you have really devoted the time to come here. I must also thank Kanishka Datsingha for speaking to you and arranging you, because not only that you gave your ideas, but you listened to all the ideas that I think that is the great thing, so that will really help you in not only bringing the point of view of the private sector and the industry, and also educating some of them who may, as you say, maybe not know the private sector way of doing things. So thank you very much. I think I'm sure very soon that you'll be heading one of the important committees, I know, and certainly from our side, whatever that we could do, we will certainly support you. Then of course on the tourism, that's a very key area. We hope that the situation will improve to bring in the foreign exchange and ICT, BPO. I will tell you, we will support everything. Don't go to these foreign universities. Foreign universities at the moment, we have no foreign exchange. No. If you tell Colombo University, Moroto University, they can really do this, not on their own, with the private sector. Public-private partnership is very essential. They can't do on their own. You see, if the Colombo University has 100 colleges, if Moroto University has 100 colleges, your problem of 10,000 is already met, So maybe over 3 years, you will have 30,000, 40,000 people coming out. But they must recognize this, they must control them, they must advise them, and then the university. Now people are saying no university places, no. So university must get into everything. UGC will not happen. Give the universities the authority, they will do everything, Otherwise, you can never run it from one central place, So I think this is very important, and I think Manil's area, he really gave a very good view, because a lot of the companies are going to get affected as a result of this. So maybe the writing down of all these things, so assets. So this is a very key area where the audit point of view is coming. But I'm sure that if you work with the Auditor General also, then he can see from his side how the public sector industries are going to be affected. So Manil, I think we are very thankful to you. So let me thank everyone for the great seminar that we have had, webinar that we had. I'm sorry that we have overstepped the time. And let me thank Ruchira, a very excellent job, Ruchira, that you have done. And finally, we do hope that we will be able to support you in any way, because our function as management accountants, as chartered accountants, as accounting technicians, whatever area that is there, we are there to serve the country. That is our main thing. And we want to see that with this crisis that we are having, we'll be able to overcome it. And people also must realize that they also have to make a sacrifice. And without that, we will never be able to come up. So thank you. And I thank all our speakers and panelists and all our participants for giving us all the support. And I'm sure that this would have been a very useful webinar for all of you. Thank you and all the best.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. Thank you, Ruchira.
Thanks. Okay, we'll end up.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.